So good morning and welcome to the Housing Agency Conference 2021. My name is Sarah Carey and I'm your chairman for the first session this week, coming to you live from Dublin Castle. So hello to the guests who have joined us here this morning in the castle, and hello to everyone at home. I hope you're all comfortable and looking forward to an interesting session. The sessions will continue online for the rest of the week, every morning from 11:30 until 1, and you can continue to register on the Housing Agency website for free. So feel free to spread the word and let people know that they can continue to join us online every morning this week. Now this morning we are joined by a distinguished panel led by the Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien. Thank you for joining us, Minister. We also have with us Bob Jordan, Chief Executive of the Housing Agency. Marion Finnegan is Managing Director of Sherry Fitzgerald Residential and Advisory. And Barry Quinlan is Assistant Secretary at the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. But first this morning, I'd like to introduce to you Michael Carey, who's no relation and Chairman of the Housing Agency. Michael has spent much of his career working in senior management roles in large multinational food groups. He's an entrepreneur and investor, owning and managing a number of food businesses. He is currently chairman of East Coast Bakehouse and the Company of Food, a specialist food sector investment business. Prior to becoming chairman of the Housing Agency, Michael completed 2 terms as chairman of On Board Bia, playing a leadership role in building Board Bia into one of the most respected state agencies in the country. Michael Carey.
Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening session of the Housing Agency's 2021 annual conference. In a few minutes, I'll call on the Minister to address the conference and to formally open the event. As Chairman of the Board of the Housing Agency, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to some people. I'd like to thank the Board, the members of the Board and the members of the advisory panels for their generosity with their time, for their oversight of the work of the agency and for their guidance and advice. It's good to see some of you here today, and I know more are on the Zoom call. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say thank you to the Minister for his support of the agency over the last number of years, and our colleagues in the department, our partners in the sister state agencies, the approved housing bodies, the local authorities, and indeed our industry colleagues. Without your support and engagement, the Housing Agency could not fulfil its role. I'd also like to recognise the commitment and work of the executive management team and staff at the Housing Agency. The past 2 years have been a difficult time as the team of the Housing Agency adjusted to a new way of doing business with new challenges and greater demands during the period of COVID. The team at the agency showed exceptional dedication, and on behalf of the board and on behalf of all of the people who deal with you, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly say thank you. The role of this board of the Housing Agency, and indeed my own personal role as chairman, is not to work in the Housing Agency, but rather to work on the agency, on its strategy, on its structures, on its stakeholder engagement. I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to highlight some of the key issues that's currently getting board priority, issues that, if we are successful, will result in the Housing Agency continuing on a journey to optimise its impact, to ensure that we are as effective as possible as part of the solution to our housing challenges, and to play a full role in achieving an integrated housing system that meets the nation's housing needs and promotes sustainable communities. I'll mention just 2 or 3 priorities. One major current priority of the board is the creation of a new statement of strategy. Very dramatic sound in the room at the moment. To ensure that we are unfailingly clear on our purpose and our strategic priorities. The new statement of strategy for the 3 years from 2022 to 2024 is in its final phase of development. The board and the board's strategy subcommittee have signed it off, and following a period when the minister's input and approval will be sought, that will be published. Many of you here and many of you on this call have contributed to that process, so thank you for that input. The second issue, which is a major issue for me personally and for the board, is to ensure we have the right team in place to execute the strategy. I'm delighted that with the assistance of the Public Appointment Service, we successfully attracted an outstanding list of candidates to replace our retiring Chief Executive, John O'Connor. Bob Jordan, who is known to all of you, has stepped into this role. He came out at the top of that very, very competitive process. He's very quickly transitioned into the role. He's already making a real and meaningful contribution and providing clear leadership. But we need to continue to invest in and build our teams, ensuring that we have the bandwidth and the capability to take on new and expanding roles, and that our structures logically follow our strategy. Further senior appointments will be made in the coming months, adding to the existing team of highly committed and respected professionals that is currently in place. The third and the final priority for these few minutes for me is to ensure that we have a full and comprehensive engagement with our broad base of stakeholders. In the last couple of years, we've established a structure of advisory panels to provide a platform for discussion and guidance by experts in areas such as research and insight, affordability and homelessness. We've also strengthened our board and will continue to seek to attract appropriate experts and professional input to ensure we have a strong link with all our stakeholder groups so they can help shape our decisions on how we allocate our resources. We have a close and trusting relationship with many of our key stakeholders. We will continue to strive to encourage open, genuine collaboration towards achieving our shared goals and hopes. I've been involved in the board of the Housing Agency now for the past 3.5 years, and in that time we've seen change and expansion. We've responded flexibly and with agility to the nation's housing needs and to the evolving government policies. Bob will later in the session touch on some aspects of that continued evolution, change and growth in the context of Housing for All. We've also seen some real progress in the wider housing system. I think all of us have a clearer view of how we're going to tackle our housing challenges. We have a strong and well-considered plan. We have seen meaningful delivery of results, some impactful solutions being implemented and progress made. There is significantly greater capacity and capability in place to ensure that the targets for all housing types can be realised. We need to see further progress building on this foundation of achievements. While we obviously should never be complacent about the scale of the task or the devastating impact of non-performing housing systems can have on individuals and families, at the same time we need to find a way to recognise and celebrate progress and success as it's achieved. And this conference is a great opportunity to do that, but also to challenge and to look at our views, our shared views, and discuss how we will collaborate to continue the path towards an integrated housing system that meets our nation's housing needs in sustainable communities. These sessions over the coming days address some of the major issues facing us, and we will have some outstanding speakers and panellists. I hope you all enjoy the sessions and achieve a meaningful benefit from the time that you invest in them. Thank you for your engagement and for your ongoing support of the work of the agency. May I now call on the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage, Minister Darragh O'Brien, to speak with the session and to officially open the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael and Bob, and indeed the rest of the team from the Housing Agency. And good morning, everyone. Those who are here in the room and those who are zooming in on Zoom. It's really great to be here, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to officially open the conference for the Housing Agency, which is an incredibly important agency for this government, for our state, and is actually a crucial cog in the wheel in how I see that we're going to continue to make real progress in relation to housing delivery and tackling our housing crisis. So I really mean it. Thanks so much for asking me here today to talk to you. I'm always interested in listening to people. I don't have all the solutions either. There are always different views, and there may be differences in how we analyse the causes or in how exactly we might address the challenges that we face in housing in particular. But I think all of us accept the scale of the challenge and what we need to do to address it. The importance of having a home and its benefits on our well-being as individuals and indeed as a country cannot be overstated. And it is not just a housing crisis, it's a societal crisis, and one which I'm determined that we will tackle. Our programme for government commitment is that everybody should have access to sustainable, good quality housing to purchase or rent at an affordable price, built to a high standard and located close to services offering a high quality of life. And that is the guiding principle in developing Housing for All, our housing strategy. And for this opening session of the conference, Understanding Housing for All, I hope in the few minutes that I have to give you a good sense for what Housing for All is about. All of us know that there's no easy fix when it comes to the housing crisis. It is multifaceted, it is complex, and it will take time to put right. We've got to be honest with people about that. But it will be put right, and it will be done by being innovative and solution-focused. Every player, state body like the Housing Agency or otherwise, public and private, have a part to play in solving our housing problem. Any long-term solution needs the entire system pulling together in the same direction to the common goal of more, better houses and apartments at affordable prices to buy or rent. And to really restore the housing system to a sustainable level, we need to deal with all the different component parts. It is only by taking measures across all aspects of our housing system that we can begin to improve the situation for our citizens right across the board. Housing for All does exactly this. I believe it is the solution to our housing crisis. It is the most ambitious housing plan in the history of the state, and it sets out, over the 4 pathways which I will discuss, a series of bold actions, 213 to be exact, that will ensure that we rise to the challenge that we face. Housing for All is backed by historic levels of investment, with in excess of €20 billion through the Exchequer, the Land Development Agency and the Housing Finance Agency just over the next 5 years. This will provide the sector with the stability and certainty it needs. It is the most significant intervention by the state in housing ever. It is fully funded, multi-annual, multi-billion euro plan for the first time. Over 300,000 new homes will be built between now and the end of 2030. Over 90,000 new social homes, 36,000 affordable purchase homes, and for the first time ever, at least 18,000 cost rental homes. It is the largest state-led building programme in the history of the state. Now, saying one thing is one, but executing is another, and that's what we're about, is delivery. And believe me, I don't underestimate the challenge that lies ahead. The plan is set out across 4 pathways to address the most pressing issues, and they're supporting home ownership which I believe in, and increasing affordability, to eradicating homelessness, increasing social housing delivery, and really importantly, supporting social inclusion, increasing new housing supply across the board, and addressing vacancy and making sure we use our stock efficiently. And while the 4 pathways address specific challenges, they do not exist in isolation. In order to support the pathways, we have a series of actions that will create a sustainable housing system and underpin some key government priorities, like critical infrastructure development for transport and utilities, driving high standards in construction, which will help us meet our commitments under the new Climate Action Plan, supporting sustainable communities, and reducing residential construction costs and supporting innovation. I mentioned briefly home ownership, and I know only too well that many, many people are struggling with the cost of buying or indeed renting a home. And Housing for All puts forward a new vision that places home ownership right back at the centre of housing policy, and to bring back home ownership in the hands of ordinary working people. And that's what I earnestly want. Thank you, Chair. The First Home Scheme will see people buy a home with the help of the government by bridging the gap between the finance they have and the cost of the home that they want. The local authority-led affordable purchase scheme will see homes for sale across the country averaging 250,000. We have a reformed local authority home loan, which will see more single people eligible for state-backed mortgages, and our affordable housing fund is open already. It goes without saying that the new affordable unit within the housing agency will be a vital support to our local authorities in delivering affordable housing. The affordability measures that I've provided for in Housing for All will set us on a path to reversing the current trend that's seen home ownership rates drop to historic lows in this country. I recognise that rent affordability is more challenging than mortgage affordability in several Irish cities. And while increased supply is indeed the longer-term solution, in the short term, I am and we are acting on this. Given the continuing rise in HICP inflation, I moved quickly to engage with the Office of the Attorney-General and to secure government approval to introduce a 2% cap on rent increases in the RPZs. In addition to significantly reducing the level of rent increases, once enacted, this legislation will also deal with another programme for government commitment to improve and security of tenure by introducing tenancies of indefinite duration. And I'm fully committed to improving the situation for renters in Ireland and making strides in this regard. I'm also acutely aware that about 80% of those who are renting in any independent survey that I have read will state very clearly they wish to own their own homes. But in the meantime, there is work to be done on rent to try to address the issue with increased rents. It is not just a phenomenon in Ireland, but across Europe with post-COVID inflation. But we do bring forward another form of housing in Housing for All, an entirely new tenure called cost rental, which I believe will be a game changer for rent affordability in time. We actually have our first tenants in situ in our first cost rental homes, of which they're paying about 50% of the open market rate in rent. Applications for other schemes have recently closed, and from seeing the volume of applications, we know that we need to significantly scale up cost rental in Ireland. And we've set targets of at least 18,000 cost rental units between now and 2030. I actually believe we can deliver significantly more. It is ambitious, but it is an achievable target. And I've met families who have actually secured their home through affordable rental, long-term secure, state-supported rent, and that we are actually ensuring through Housing for All and the legislation that underpins it under the Affordability Act and indeed the Land Development Act that are both in place right now, that we can also seek to have ethical investment in this space too, to deliver cost rental as is done in continental Europe in particular. A real priority for me, and I think all of us will feel this, all of us who work within housing, is the prevalence of homelessness. And the restricted housing options for the most vulnerable in our society are among the most pressing issues that we face. I was proud to sign the Lisbon Declaration on behalf of Ireland in June, and that's underpinning the government commitment and our determination to eliminate homelessness by the end of this decade. And we need to set that challenging target. A country like Ireland should not have 8,475 people homeless. We've made strides in the last 2 years. We've reduced it significantly. I will be putting forward, through Housing First, another 1,200 housing tenancies that Bob is acutely familiar with, of the strides that we've made in tenancy retention in that space. We've also got to use our stock better. That's why in the last 2 years, or short of 2 years, we brought back over 6,000 social housing units that were vacant back into use. But I intend to tackle vacancy across our towns and cities through the implementation of our Croí Cónaithe fund that will help with viability, but that will help with brownfield site development as well. We're also making significant changes in our planning system, and I just last week received approval from Cabinet to bring forward the large-scale residential development legislation, which will replace the SHD process. Again, a commitment in the programme for government that we will see good. In the short space of time I have left in this address, Chairperson, I don't have time to deal with the details within that, but I do just want to end on this, that I am acutely aware of the challenges that we face in housing. But more importantly, I think I am absolutely confident that we have the wherewithal and the ability in this country, we have the expertise, the knowledge, the know-how. But now we have a plan backed by multi-annual finance to make a real difference on a whole-of-government approach to tackling the housing crisis, a whole sectoral approach, private and public. We cannot tackle this housing crisis with one arm tied behind our back. We need all of the aspects of the sector working together to do this. And the projections into next year are good and are positive. And we're starting to see a significant response from the sector. So I look forward to answering any questions the audience may have. To thank you again most sincerely for the invitation to address you here this morning, to wish everyone well in this very busy 5-day conference that you will have, which is an important one for us in government, which will allow people who are involved in the sector to look at all the different elements of Housing for All. And I know Bob and the team and Michael will be feeding back into me the feedback which is brought forward from our experts. So thank you all very much again for your attention this morning, and indeed for the invitation to be here.
Thank you very much, Minister. And from coming in from outside, like, it is great to hear of all those different components. But I just want to ask you about that. I think in 2018, my word of the year was multifactorial. Everyone I speak to says the cause of the housing problem is different. It's the planning system is broken. Our financing is all wrong. You know, they can pick a different thing. How are you going to pull all those different stakeholders together and get everybody on the same page so they can deliver this plan?
And all of the people who were talking to you were all right, and all of them were correct, because there are many different issues, from finance to supply to cost to now, we even have in the short term, we have a COVID pandemic that we've had to deal with over the last 20 months that has actually restricted what we can deliver. But that's what's important about having a deliverable plan. And that's what's important about having a cross-government approach on Housing for All, which covers both private and public, social housing delivery, affordable housing, eradicating homelessness. But dealing with issues, we do need to reform our planning system. I think that's recognised. That's not to say it is, of course, fit for purpose. But we always need to move on and learn lessons as to how we can do things better. We also can do things better in relation to delivery and the state being involved. But I think fundamentally the difference with this plan versus others is twofold. One is that the state's backing it with real money, real finance, just short of 21 billion, and that does not include additional investment in water infrastructure of about 6 billion that we need between now and 2026, because it gives that multi-annual plan. So it means that our local authorities, our housing agencies, our private sector can actually plan for what we're about to deliver. But we've set forward in the 213 different action points and published them, the things that we believe need to be done. And they're being run by the Department of the Taoiseach and myself, which literally overseen, because I give you one instance, if I could use by way of an example, of how housing crosses all government departments. If we take, we've about 9,000 properties in this state that are potentially vacant because of people who've moved into long-term care through the Fair Deal scheme. So in many places I've visited over the last few years, you'll find where families haven't been able to rent out homes or indeed sell out homes with the permission, obviously, of the person. We're making those changes now. That's a small issue. If we can even get half of those 9,000 homes back into use, you're starting to improve the situation. Vacancy is one thing that I don't think we've managed to tackle over the last decade or more, and that we're going to need some really tough decisions on. I'm going to extend the exemptions on planning for residential uses of above shop living, but I think we need to go further than that. If we want people really living back in our cities and our towns and above shops, we're going to do that. So I'm going to provide for grants as well for our younger couples or individuals who want to take older homes back into use. That speaks to our climate action as well. In relation, we don't have to build everything. We've got to look at the stock that we have. So I suppose, I hope that's not a rambling answer. There's so much that we could go through, but everything's connected on housing. But fundamentally, we're looking at supply and affordability. We've got to get supply up, and we've got to improve affordability, and we've got to improve our costs. And it's doable.
And are you happy that all the different stakeholders involved, say from the department to local government, I mean, even when you're talking about the living over the shop, that involves so many different regulatory bodies. Do you feel everyone really is on the same page as this, and we're not going to get bogged down in interagency squabbling and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I actually do. I do feel everyone is pointed, because everyone understands the gravity of this housing crisis. We've a responsibility as a government, but all of us as actors and within housing and people who have responsibility to make a real difference, because failure actually isn't an option, because there's one real chance now with everyone pushing together of being able to make a real difference. That's why I saw how agencies work together in the creation of cost rental. Cost rental was something that I'd agreed with my coalition partners in the programme for government negotiations. Within 12 months, we had it up and running. and Barry will talk a bit more about that. More so with our first tenants in place. So it's proof of concept that we need to be showing in certain areas of how we can do things better. And like if you look at how that's worked with our approved housing bodies, through the Irish Council for Social Housing and others, that they've been able to use their best practice in managing social housing, partnering with our local authorities to bring forward tenancies for working people. I really think that when I mentioned the societal issue that we have, there's a whole cohort of people out there who do feel disenfranchised and that they don't have any part in this country. They're working hard, they're paying tax, they're trying to save every cent they've got, they may be paying rent of £2,000 a month, and they're saying basically, what about me? What is government and the state doing to help me? That's why I have put such a focus on affordability. Like one of the first meetings I had was with this man beside me when I was 3 days in the job, when I called John O'Connor, who I should have mentioned, who Bob's predecessor, superb public servant and a great lead in the housing agency. But John came in with Barry and we started working straight away on affordable housing. Now we've the Act in place. We know what we need to do. We've the finance to back it up. That's in quite a short space of time. So yes, I'm optimistic, but realistic too, that we absolutely have the wherewithal to get to grips with this.
Yeah, I think that cost rental model is a huge shift for Ireland. I'm not sure the public are fully aware of how significant that is and how it's going to change things, but it's a huge initiative. So just one more question, and you mentioned realism there. I'm a bit concerned about the target to eradicate homelessness. Is it realistic? Like when it comes to employment, we consider full employment even when there are 5% of people unemployed. Like, are you wise setting yourself a target like that? Can it be done?
In short, yes. And I'll tell you why. Because in the last 18 months, we've managed to reduce, all of us working with the NGOs together, and I chaired the Homeless Task Force myself, and when Bob was in the DRHE, and there we managed to reduce homelessness by over 2,400, 2,500. We've improved on preventions. The state has, a country like Ireland should not have 8,500 people homeless. There are reasons for that, but we can work better to absolutely eradicate it. And I think I've certainly seen in the support that I've got across government, let's say from the Department of Health and the Minister for Health, about how we manage, let's say, those with much more complex health needs. Bob will have specific experience on this in the whole Housing First area. People wouldn't have thought that that would have worked. Nearly 90% tenancy retention rate. And these are people who have indeed very complex mental and indeed sometimes physical health and addiction issues, that with the right supports we can really make a difference. So I am confident. I suppose in 2030 you can ask me, was I right to actually sign that pledge? But I signed it on behalf of the government, on behalf of the Irish people. And there's a focus across Europe, actually, when we look outside of our own country, that it is an issue across Europe. And that's why sometimes when we talk about housing, that commentators, yourself excluded, Sarah, I would say this, tend to talk about Ireland like the issues are only ours and nowhere else. If you look at inflation right now, and look at Holland, you look at Germany, other places, there are issues everywhere, but we can learn from those countries, and they can learn from us too, as well. So I believe we've had 2 years of COVID, 2020, 2021, and people remember them as the COVID years. From 2022, there'll be years of delivery in housing at a significant level, and that's why I think it's an exciting time to be involved.
Okay, well, thank you, Minister. And I'm not sure if you can stay with us for another little while. The Minister might have to go, but he may be able to stay and join us for the rest of the conversation. So now I'm going to introduce to you Bob Jordan, the new Chief Executive of the Housing Agency, who was appointed in September of this year. So quite new in the job, but they tell me he's hit the ground running. Previously, he was the National Director of the Housing First programme, which is a key part of the government's response to long-term homelessness. During 2016 to 2017, he was Special Advisor to Simon Coveney when he was Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government. And prior to that, Bob was Chief Executive of the National Housing Charity Threshold for nearly a decade. So he has seen all angles of this and is well qualified for the job. Bob.
Good morning, everybody. I have slides and I have a script, so let's see how it goes. Minister, it's great that you're with us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We're fully behind your plan. I suppose there's a huge level of interest in this conference today, over 500 people. There's plenty of room here in Dublin Castle, so we're hoping that everybody can join us physically next year. Obviously, we want to thank your officials in the department as well for all the support you're showing to us. And I suppose I want to thank our chairperson, Michael Carey, as well, the members of our board and advisory panels. There's a real commitment to making this event this week as interactive as possible and as relevant to what's going on. As has been said, this is my first conference as CEO of the Housing Agency. I suppose I just want to pay tribute to my predecessor, John O'Connor, for, I think, the outstanding leadership and commitment he's shown in the housing sector. Apparently John is retired. I've seen absolutely no evidence that that's happening. And it's great to have him still around. And we wish him well as chair designate of the Housing Commission. I suppose the question I've really been asked quite a lot over the last couple of months by people in the housing sector, family and friends, is what does the Housing Agency do? And actually, there's no short answer to that. So I've tried to come up with a sort of clear and maybe efficient way of doing that. I suppose it boils down to two things for me. One is we're here to help our stakeholders, the Department of Housing, local authorities, approved housing bodies, to deliver on their housing goals and objectives. And as Michael said, we're here to help to make the housing system work better, both in terms of increasing supply and delivering sustainable communities, promoting sustainable communities. Our work can be divided into three levels. The triangle kind of shrank a little bit there in the wash on the way to the screen, but we're here to support evidence-based policy making, contributing to the design and delivery of government programmes, and providing hands-on technical support, sleeves-up technical support to housing projects on the ground as well. And I suppose there aren't too many agencies that are in that position. I suppose just to give you a practical example there maybe, in terms of cost rental, we were involved in the Vienna Model Exhibition with Dublin City Council back in 2019, making real, I suppose, a European model of housing. We've obviously been very involved in the Affordable Housing Act, Minister. At the programme level, we're involved in administering the CRAL loans, cost rental equity loans, 35 million this year, 70 million next year. And actually at the project level on the ground, we've been involved in transferring land from the land aggregation scheme to the Leary-Rathdown County Council for the Enniskerry Road scheme, working with TUIT, Respond, the local authority, the department and the Housing Finance Agency on that. So I suppose in terms of making the housing system work better, we're working at all three levels simultaneously, policy, programmes and projects, so there's a fairly big production line in the Housing Agency. I think we're part of a feedback loop, so there is a connection between the end user of these programmes and policy, and it's an iterative process. So even as we're moving along, even now with cost rental, we're making slight tweaks as we go. And I suppose we have the ability to transfer the knowledge we've gained to new problems in the housing sector. So like this is a virtuous circle here, and sometimes it's a bit of a vortex as well because it's drawing in newer and bigger projects all the time. And obviously we're up for that, but as Michael said, we need to be right-sized for that. We need to have the right resources, capability and staff to be able to deliver on new and more complex projects. Housing for All provides us with a comprehensive framework for resolving the housing issues facing our country. I hope you don't mind this analogy, Minister, but it's a little bit like, you know, when you go to a new city and you take the hop-on, hop-off bus tour, you take in all the loops, you take in all the routes, but then, you know, as organisations, we all have to kind of take out our map when we leave the hotel the next day and work out what route is in this for us. And I suppose there's a lot in it for the Housing Agency. What I've seen is local authorities, approved housing bodies, and indeed people in the private sector work out what are the things that are most relevant to their sector in Housing for All. And obviously there's a lot of areas of importance to the agency. Just in terms of policy, obviously, Minister, you've mentioned cost rental. It's rare to be around for the birth of a new tenure. And clearly we'll be nurturing its growth over the next couple of years. And no doubt there'll be some adjustments maybe to cost rental policy, but cost rental has moved from an idea really, you know, that NESC, I suppose, was promoting back in 2004 to people actually living in houses right now. We're also assisting the department with development of the National Housing Strategy for people with disabilities. and housing for older people. I suppose what's important about this policy work is really that in relation to people with disabilities and older people, that the strategies are based on the choices of people themselves. We promote independent living, and we're trying to integrate this type of housing into mainstream housing design. In terms of envisioning the future, prototypes are very important to influencing the policy system. I mentioned the Vienna model. We're kind of working on Vienna model part 2 with the Irish Architecture Foundation. We'll be inviting submissions for designs of housing to deliver sustainable communities. And I suppose that will involve, without giving too much away, it'll involve kind of producing 3D prototypes of new types of housing. So we're looking forward to launching that in the new year. We're also working on mixed tenure neighbourhoods. I think on Wednesday, Michelle Norris and Aideen Hayden are presenting some work on the clustering and dispersing of housing in mixed tenure communities, supported by the ISSH and ourselves. And I suppose the other area of work is on research. We collect data to support existing policies, including the Summary of Social Housing Assessments, the Housing First Needs Assessment. We've been conducting attitudinal surveys with householders and tenants. I suppose one of the interesting things is that about 1 in 10 households are now living in purpose-built apartments, about 1 in 5 children. I think people are in a way pretty happy with living in apartments, but clearly there's issues around indoor space, outdoor space to meet in terms of, and play spaces for children and so on, that we need to resolve over the next couple of years. I think the other thing is sometimes policymakers don't hear about the good research that's been carried out by many people out there. We can help to funnel that into the system. We've just launched our research support program, where we're looking at inviting research proposals around children and housing and sustainability in housing, and the closing date is the 15th of November. In terms of affordability, we've been driving the car. I think Barry Quinlan said we've been driving the car with kind of one wheel missing for a while. So obviously our job is to seek to embed affordability within the overall housing system with our affordable housing unit. And I suppose obviously tackling the low-hanging fruit in terms of increasing supply. We'll be managing the Croí Cónaithe Fund, a cities fund, which is all about activating planning permissions for build-to-sell apartment blocks in 4 stories or more. We know that urban living is attractive to many people, and we're committed to promoting compact urban growth. I think the issue of vacancy has become more apparent to all of us during the lockdown, when we were confined to our 5-kilometre perimeter. And Minister, the Housing Agency will obviously be providing an advisory service and compulsory purchase orders for local authorities, and we will have a role in the new Town Centre First policy. I think we're also involved in smaller, high-impact programmes. The mortgage to rent scheme has helped about 1,500 people, pyrite remediation about 2,200. You mentioned Housing First, Minister, 1,200 tenancies over the next couple of years, and we're involved in international protection. Just to say, over the last couple of weeks, we've also been helping with Amnesty International and the Open Doors Initiative, some Afghan refugees as well. So these are all programmes that provide life-changing responses to people in terms of homelessness, in terms of keeping people in their home. We're also involved in financial assessments and lending. We undertake financial appraisals of PNA and CAF and the administration of CREL loans. And what's important about this work, I think, is that the use of resources is optimised, resources are dispersed in the most efficient way, and the highest priority is placed on cost control and due diligence for the government and taxpayer. In terms of the projects aspect of Housing for All, this is about viability and vacancy. We offer technical support and procurement advice at all stages of social housing delivery. We've worked with about 50 approved housing bodies since 2016. We've worked with virtually every local authority in the country, working on issues around funding, planning, design and construction. Housing for All obviously commits to expanding the projects and procurement unit within the agency. We want to support the delivery of the housing delivery action plans in a very strategic way. Probably supporting the local authorities with build targets of up to 1,000, and obviously supporting the Tier 3, the lower Tier 3 and the Tier 2 AHBs. We have a housing acquisitions team that have acquired about 1,500 properties through the 70 million AHB fund and through direct acquisitions for local authorities over the past 5 years. And since about 2018, 250 of these properties have been acquired for Housing First. A review of the fund, that AHB fund, is already underway. And I suppose we are looking to repurpose that, Minister, in terms of vacant properties, but also in terms of the Housing First programme as well. Obviously, there's big changes to Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act. It was amended in the Affordable Housing Act. So on land purchased on or after the 1st of August, any new planning permissions will have a 20% Part 5 requirement. We're involved in issuing guidance, resources, webinars, training, guidance and toolkits in relation to Part 5 and the administration of that. I suppose the most important thing about that is that the betterment gain is gained across every local authority in the country. And I suppose, finally, Housing for All provides, as you said, Minister, a strategy to ensure that everyone in the state should have access to a home to purchase or rent at an affordable price, built to a high standard and in the right place, offering a high quality of life. Like, we're here to help. We are a centre of housing knowledge. We have the know-how and capability to support programme and project delivery. And we're obviously committed to increasing the capacity of the sector and indeed our own capacity to deliver on that. I think collaboration is crucial. It's the solution to complex problems. And we're working very closely, and even since I've started working with our colleagues in the Housing Finance Agency, the Land Development Agency, RTB, LGMA, to deliver on Housing for All. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being present here today, either in the room or online. We look forward to working with you all over the next 5 years. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a million, Bob, for outlining to us what it is the Housing Agency does. Now, our next speaker is Marion Finnegan. She's the Managing Director of Sherry Fitzgerald Residential and Advisory since 2019. Marion has been at the forefront of Sherry Fitzgerald for over 20 years. She was the first economist appointed to a property company in Ireland when she established the research arm of Sherry Fitzgerald in 1996, and subsequently was appointed its Chief Economist and Director of Research. That role involves monitoring and analysing economic and property indicators in the domestic and international markets. And I'm sure you all know Marion very well. She is a regular contributor in the Irish and international media and one of the most highly regarded commentators in the industry. Marion.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. I want to first thank Michael and Bob for the opportunity to speak today. I think Housing for All is a huge step forward for the housing crisis, and it is important that we do look to it and embrace the progress that has been made. I think it's very easy to stand on the sidelines and criticise change and to always look for the silver bullet. I mean, I think you asked earlier a good question, Sarah. A lot of people ask you when you're talking about the housing crisis, what can we do to fix it? And there isn't one thing you can do. We all know that when you're involved. There's a million things, and today we've heard of 213 steps, which is huge progress. And I think I've been working in this, it's actually over 25 years. I was 10 when I started, but you know, this industry has had a tumultuous time over the last 25 years. There's been positive years, there's been incredibly negative years, there's been years of rapid house price inflation and rapid house price deflation, and we just need stability and progress and a plan, and I think Housing for All does deliver that. So what I wanted to do today is really to give you sort of the private sector's response, which has been incredibly positive, and talk to you a little bit about where I think there's a very positive injection coming from this, and maybe tweak a little bit, maybe a little bit of critique around where I think there's bits still missing that we need to think about collectively. And I think if we're going to make a success of the future of housing in Ireland, and if we are going to achieve the aims of eradicating homelessness and bringing around stability, it is about all of us working together, not criticising each other, but actually working together to find the solution to the housing crisis. So I do have a lot of slides. I'm going to talk very fast, which I'm known for, but if I hopefully won't run over too much. So first of all, when I'm talking about the economic and political backdrop to this, we have how the housing market evolves over the next couple of years is heavily influenced by what's happening in the economy. So we know that COVID had a huge impact on all of our lives for the last 2 years, but it had a massive impact on the housing sector. So we couldn't build as many houses as we wanted to, but there's other little nuances as well, that people left rental accommodation, moved home, people made decisions that had a huge impact on the marketplace, and we can't not ignore that they are going to be impactful as they evolve and move forward. So economically, a very sound basis. I think we can take comfort in the fact that we have a good, solid economy, strongest economic growth in Europe this year, forecast to do the same again next year, good, solid domestic demand. And if you look back in history, at every time in the past when there was a significant economic event, that economic shock similar to this, be it a war or other tragedies, people moved out of society, and as they came back in, with additional savings, they reinvested, they started to spend. We're seeing that already happening on the ground, and property in Ireland is one of the things people want to invest in. So if we want to get this right, we have to be ready for the onslaught of demand which is hitting us. Unemployment, critically important. We will be back to a single-digit unemployment level by the end of next year, and that will drive demand. People have had a difficult 2 years. A lot of people have been working at a different pace. They will be back to full employment or thereabouts by the end of the next year. And that is going to drive demand for rental accommodation to buy. And I think it's important that we recognise that. Sentiment is improving. Consumer sentiment is volatile. It took a massive dip. It will be fragile. It will move up and down. But we are seeing a much more positive consumer now, willing to invest in large ticket items, cars, holidays, houses. So demand is back and very, very strong. And our experience on the ground is that from June of last year, when the doors reopened and we were allowed to start trade again, demand for property has been incredibly strong and actually also impatient. So people realise their homes now were their castles, and they want to get into whatever home they want. So whatever's the highest common denomination they can get to, they want to get back into that accommodation. So that is really driving the marketplace forward. Central bank rules, love them or hate them, I think they've had a very stabilising impact on the marketplace. I know they can be critiqued. I know they're a blunt instrument. I know there are challenges around it. But if you compare the past to the present, a lot of the stability that we've seen over the last couple of years are as a direct result of the macroprudential policy rules. Could we tweak them? Definitely. Could we improve on them? Definitely. But we shouldn't throw them out and we shouldn't criticise them. I won't talk you through this, but this is history. Before macroprudential policy rules, every single time we had any sort of a hit to the economy, we had a dramatic response to the housing sector. When things were good, house prices rose dramatically. When things were bad, they fell dramatically. 60% reduction in value during the global financial crisis. When COVID began, a lot of people said, here we go again, we're about to see a dip in prices. And we didn't. And the reason we didn't is the prices hadn't accelerated in the previous years. So stability in pricing is critically important. So we actually saw prices just flatline and start to grow again. None of this rapid 20% increase, 20% decrease. Stability is critically important. Help to Buy, when it was introduced initially, it got a lot of slagging, a lot of critique, and said, you know, why are you bringing in a demand measure when supply is the problem? But this was a very nuanced response. By bringing in Help to Buy, we saw a completely different response from the supply side. So private developers suddenly saw realisable demand. They could actually deliver accommodation for first-time buyers and it would be able to be sold. And that changed the profile of the type of properties we were delivering over the last number of years. Again, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Help to Buy brought about progress. And we've seen a significant, this echoes back, but I'll persist. We've seen a significant change in the type of units that are being delivered over the last couple of years, which has had a very positive impact on supply. So we're seeing much higher proportion of starter homes now being delivered. The fact that this has been extended until the end of next year is positive. I'd probably like a longer term view. It's very hard to plan if you only know something that's going to last for 12 months, but it's still a very positive initiative. So in terms of Housing for All, a lot has been said, so I'm not going to go into huge detail, but what I will do is pick on the points that I think will be most effective and most well received by the private sector. It addresses all elements of this, and I just want to pick on something the Minister said earlier. He said it's not a housing crisis, it's a societal crisis. it's an accommodation crisis. It's much bigger than we need to build more houses. We need to build more of the right type of houses in the right locations for the right tenure mix, and a lot is here. This is the first time we've ever seen a plan for housing that's this detailed. There literally is no place to hide, and that's a good thing. It's fearful, but it's a good thing. So we can see there is a clear plan for the delivery of all different types of housing tenures. Now, I think there's a couple of nuances that need to be addressed, but overall, this is the best path for housing that I have ever seen in terms of future looking. There's a couple of things, I should have brought my glasses, but there's a couple of elements that I just want to mention in particular that I think will have a big influence on the delivery of a better housing structure. I think Project Tosig deals with a very important fact. We need more service sites. We need to address this, not just state-owned sites. We need to facilitate the release of sites. Connea, I can't pronounce the words correctly, for cities and towns is critically important. What we've seen in the last couple of years is apartment dwellings have only been viable for PRS purposes. Now, that is not about a mixed development strategy. We do need to ensure that apartments can be built and sold by people who want owner-occupiers. I think this is a positive step in the right direction. The towns element of that, where you're looking at activating sites or looking at vacancy within the towns, at no point in the last 25 years have I ever seen rural Ireland driving the housing prices inflation. It's doing so now. And the reason for that is much of what has been delivered in terms of housing supply over the last couple of years has been delivered in Dublin, the GDA, and now a little bit more in Cork, Limerick and Galway. Rural Ireland hasn't had that uplift in supply. It hasn't had stock replenished. We really need to address that shortage of accommodation in rural Ireland because people are going home. Some people think that they can work from home indefinitely. Maybe they can. And that is putting huge pressure on demand in rural Ireland. And what's driving house price inflation now is that lack of accommodation. So I think that element is critically important. Affordability is a huge issue. We've known that for decades now. So I think the shared equity scheme, again, will go some way to addressing that. Large-scale residential development, it was a dreadful word. If you went into a presentation with developers and said fast-track planning, well, you'd be shot. So it didn't work. So a review of the whole planning system where we can really address the shortcomings, judicial review, get a full overhaul of that will be critically important. And I think the land value sharing, it's a Kenny report style response. It is a positive measure. But what I'll do is take those measures and just mention how we think they will be effective in the market as I go through the residential sector. Overall transactions last year, about 46,000 transactions in the entire country, 55,000 the previous year, I think somewhere around 55,000 again this year. So what we've seen is a nice uptick in activity in the second-hand market, not so much in the private new home sector because that's been constrained by the lockdown in the early part of the year, but we are seeing a return to levels of activity that we saw in 2019 in overall terms. But that represents 2.4% of the state. It's still incredibly low in terms of a volume of transactions. So we have a market which is still quite strangled in terms of activity. As we saw for the first half of this year, there were about 24,000 transactions, which was up 29% on 2020, very positive, but last year was fairly constrained, up 1% on 2019. A contraction in the new home sector, but an increase of about 5% in the second-hand sector. But notably, transactions in Dublin are actually flat. So you're not seeing more sales in Dublin, so you're seeing more sales in regional Ireland. The only place you're seeing an uptick in activity that's really notable is higher value properties over 800,000. This is not a boom. It reflects 3 years where properties over 800,000 simply didn't sell. So we've seen a lot of properties in the country homes, farms and estates, or larger value properties, which because of Brexit didn't transact during 18, 19, 17, now actually transacting. So they're not appreciating significantly, but they are selling more rapidly. And it's an interesting trend line to watch. What that does achieve is the cogs in the wheel are all moving now. When that upper end of the market was stagnant, it prevented people from trading. So now we're seeing more activity coming through. It's primarily owner-occupier demand. This is an important piece that I want to bring out. I know we have introduced cost rental, but we can't forget that there is a private rental sector with private investors exiting the market and not being replenished. So here you can see 13 to 14% of the purchases, and these are Sherry Fitzgerald sales only, and we represent about 15% market share. So only 13 to 14% of our purchases were investors coming into the marketplace. When I look at vendors, it's about 30% of our vendors were investors leaving the marketplace. The loss in the private rental sector is very acute. So we've lost about 22,000 tenancies in the last 4 or 5 years out of that private rental sector. We should have grown it by 20,000. So the fact that private investors are leaving means that the rental sector is under very significant pressure. I think that's a really important point not to forget. We have a very big focus on homes for people to buy, but that rental sector has to be more than just addressing the cost rental. I have to say I disagree with the cap on rents, not because I believe rents should be rising, because I think you're treating the symptom, not treating the cause. The cause is here. Private investors are leaving the marketplace. PRS is not the solution. It will be part of the solution for the central business district in Dublin. It's not going to solve the rental crisis in Sligo or Mullingar or Ballinasloe. We need private investors as well. There's another little piece of that cog that hasn't been addressed with this. So I think that is something that should be looked at. Future demand, we see obviously the population growing to about 5.8 million, according to the Central Statistics Office. I think that is actually needed for about 37,000, not slightly higher than what the government are forecasting that they will achieve, but not significantly. So it's the last time we looked at this, there was a gap of about 12,000 between what the private sector believed and what the state believed. So we're getting closer. You can see the spread of that throughout the entire country. There is strong demand in Dublin and the Mid East, but equally very strong demand in regional Ireland, which really hasn't reactivated in terms of construction activity at all. Supply this year, as was said earlier, will probably deliver over 20,000. So that is a huge achievement in the year that's been, but a long way to go to hit that 37,000 target. Construction activity has improved around the country. The first half of the year, though, if you just think about it where we're at, just to show the depths of the crisis that we're in, Limerick is seen to have a very significant uplift. We built 276 units in the first half of this year of all types, social housing, private housing and everything, one-off housing. So there is a very long way to go to hit those targets. Now, I do think if you look back over the momentum that was in the commercial market in the years after the global financial crisis, where we saw a huge uplift in development in commercial space, the demand for that space arguably could be a little thwarted at the moment. So we do have a lot of skilled personnel living in Ireland who may have previously been very focused on delivering commercial space, who we could divert back into the residential space, because the ask is big to deliver 37 or even 33,000 houses. This, every 6 months we look at the stock of available accommodation to buy. It's an important barometer for what's going to happen next. So in the summer of this year, 17,100 units available for sale all over the country in the second-hand market, down marginally on last year, but down 26% on 2019. And the biggest reduction in available stock was in rural Ireland. Dublin, Cork, Limerick and Galway arguably had marginally less or marginally more stock available, but all of rural Ireland saw a very, very significant reduction. So what people had done is that COVID reactivated demand. People made decisions quickly and the available stock was absorbed quite quickly, and that's what's fueling price inflation. So that's why Croí Cónaithe is very important for the towns of Ireland. We do need to provide service sites. We do need to get vacant accommodation made available. Otherwise, what we'll find is rural Ireland will drive the housing price inflation that we don't need in this country. We need stability in prices. And because average values outside of Dublin are lower than Dublin, macroprudential policy rules are not as effective. So we do need supply as the solution for to achieve stability in rural Ireland. This is the vendor profile that I mentioned. So you can see there 30% of our vendors were selling investment properties. So 1 in 3 of our vendors were selling. I think the actual exodus of private investors is even greater than we can see from the RTB. If you sell your property and you're a landlord, the first thing you do is probably not ring the RTB and say, can you just deregister me? So it takes time for that data to come through. So I think we've probably lost a lot more than 20,000 units out of the private rental sector. And it didn't have as big an impact on us in the last 18 months or 2 years because people weren't renting. They left rental accommodation, they moved home, they moved out of that accommodation. They're going to start to come back in now, and the available stock simply isn't there to meet that demand. So I think the pressure on rents is going to be greater, and dare I say, a rental cap isn't going to be enough of a solution. We need to get supply, and if you want the private investors to stay, it has to be attractive for them to do so. And huge levels of regulation and 52% tax is not attractive. And every other developed property market has a private investor element. We too, as a sparsely populated country, need a private sector, a private investor element in our market. This is house price inflation in the year to the end of third quarter by our own index. The darkest areas on the map are rural Ireland. So Dublin has 5.5% growth in average prices. Outside of Dublin is 11%. So you can really see the pressure of contracting stock, re-energised demand and no new homes activity really outside the urban centres, putting significant upward pressure on prices. So if anything, while we always said let's get Dublin, the GDA, let's get stock up, now we really need to look at this as an all-Ireland problem, which will take a lot of changes to provide a solution. So in terms of the outlook, what the immediate things that we're seeing on the ground that I think will impact us. In terms of transaction activities, I think we'll probably see somewhere in the order of 55,000 this year, growing to about 58,000. Again, it's still relatively low versus the overall stock levels, but some improvement trend lines. But a lot of that, again, I think you'll see a lot of that uplift will be in areas outside the core cities. In terms of completions, we think next year we'll get to 26,000. It'll be about 2026 before we hit that 35,000 against these forecast demand levels. So we have a lot of latent demand that hasn't been satisfied in the marketplace. So I think the fact that while we are improving the supply levels, we are reducing that gap, we have a long way to go. And if we can achieve more than this, if we can divert more labour into this sector, all the better to control that level of price inflation. At the moment, price inflation last year was negligible. We didn't see deflation, which was a positive sign of stability. This year, I think for Dublin, prices will be up about 7% all told at the end of the year. Ireland higher overall at about 9.5%, so outside Dublin leading that. Next year, hopefully, we won't see the frenzied activity that we saw this year. Also, the private sector in terms of new homes will deliver more product next year. What we saw in the first half of this year, particularly in the latter months, so April and May, was a huge level of frenzied activity from first-time buyers looking at the second-hand market, and that was really fueling price inflation. I think if that can be reduced a little bit next year, that would hopefully see prices coming in at a much lower level. But still, over the 2-year period, you're seeing prices rising by 12% and 17%. So it is absolutely critical that we address the supply-side constraints as soon as possible. There's a huge amount in this plan. Within our own company, we're spending a lot of time speaking to our clients and sharing what we think are the valuable aspects of this. I think it's critically important that we get behind it and show support, because this is really the future when we do need to make changes to stop this trend re-emerging again. Thank you very much.
Marion, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. And I know I have loads of questions for you, but for everyone at home, do use the Q&A function, please, if you have questions. And Rosalind here will take them when we go to our audience here. There's so much interesting stuff coming up here. We definitely want to dive into it a bit more. So our next and final speaker for this morning's session is Barry Quinlan, who is the Assistant Secretary at the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. Barry has responsibility for housing affordability, inclusion and the homelessness division of the department. And that division is responsible for leading and overseeing the delivery of commitments in the programme for government in respect of home ownership measures and affordability, tackling homelessness, traveller accommodation and other social inclusion measures. The role also has responsibility for the oversight of the department's strategic policy unit. So Barry is a busy man.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Hello everybody. It's great to be back in a conference with actual humans in the room, which is so that's nice to see. And look, thanks very much to Bob and Michael. I'm on the board of the Housing Agency as well. I didn't put that in, but that's another little thing that I do. And look, just to say in terms of the Housing Agency, and it's great to see this conference back, but the Housing Agency is one of the most critical partners that the department has. And you know, it is a big challenge, housing, so we really need that sort of partnership approach, and that's always been found there hugely with John, Bob's predecessor, and now with Bob, who I would have worked with for a long time as well. So look, I think Sarah introduced me there. Now, I'm not going to go through the 213 actions that are in the plan. If you know, we could do it that way, but look, it's for people to read it. Most of the people I find, the stakeholders involved in housing, you know, and it's a housing system, so it's all of us. I think there's a good level of understanding now. Since 2013, I'm one of the veterans there, like Marion, that we were there, you know, during that period. And look, it was a very difficult period for the country, for an awful lot of the stakeholders in housing, and hugely for the public. So those memories are still there. But I would be optimistic now overall when I think about it and about where we were, where we came from, the resilience of the Irish people that we've seen again with COVID, and now the journey that we're on, the next steps. So look, I just want to talk to you a little bit about that, put a bit more meat on the bones of what the Minister was talking about the approach. So I'm not going to talk about the plan in detail, that's there for everybody to read, but just about how we're doing our business, you know, how government is going about this, how it's trying to deal with this problem. So look, the plan, and I won't dwell on this, but in terms of the 4 pathways and kind of how we came up with these things, home ownership and increasing affordability, that's absolutely supreme now, very, very important, and I think that has come back more and more through the political system and through stakeholders, etc., that people being able to afford to buy and rent, particularly in the areas of greatest employment where people live, those emerging, and you see with the CSO census where the new towns are, and I think that has been really important. And to be honest with you, I think the system has listened. That's why it's top of the list. Eradicating homelessness, and Sarah mentioned this to the Minister, and look, it is a major and a big ambition to put into the plan. My assessment of that would be the NGOs that I work with, the stakeholders that I work with, they welcome that. They said you have to go for this. This is the time now. Homelessness reaching 10,000 was a milestone for the country in the wrong way. We got it back down, huge amount of work across the system, local authorities, NGOs, the department, the agency, all working together. And everybody wants that now. So the 10,000 was reduced to below 8,000. As things have come back now, it has risen most recently, but there's a huge tailwind to really go for that. And I think the Minister signed it. That was the same with other countries. We all did the same. We all said, we're not going to accept this. We're really going to go for it. So I think it's important that it's there. In terms of social housing, huge emphasis on build. So there's lots of ways to deliver social housing, but there's a major, major focus now on reaching that 9,000 to 10,000 build target under Housing for All. Supporting social inclusion, and I would have a lot of these pieces myself. Housing is a problem for everybody. There are people in society where it can be even more of a problem and they need more help. I think those areas would be very close to my own heart, and I have older people, people with disabilities, travellers, and I think all of those, it's very important that we keep a key focus on those, because as I say, they are parts of society where an extra bit of help can be needed. And I think the system again is hugely up for that. New housing supply generally, I'll touch on this again. Traditionally in Ireland, it was around 90% private housing, whether that was for rent or for sale, and 10% social. But we're changing that, so there's a major state investment, and we're looking for a new overall housing system, a new model, and Sarah mentioned cost rental being an element of that. But one way or the other, the home builders, developers, etc., are going to be absolutely crucial to delivering this supply. So we need that whole piece of it. Again, I'll go through the numbers in a second. And then the last piece of the puzzle, and look, with the Climate Action Plan launched only recently, I think, look, it's very important. The use of that existing stock is really important. It's a difficult nut to crack, but again, very important that it's there as one of the pathways, one of the pillars that we're working towards. So look, just in terms of some of the numbers, they are big numbers. The evidence basis here, I think, is very strong, and the 37,000 Marion mentioned. Look, my view on that would be get to the 33,000. We can think about 37,000, but look, the numbers that we have now. I was on a symposium actually up in Northern Ireland, and a lot of the countries from Britain and Ireland were on that. And it was the Scottish model that are there. It's a very detailed model in how they model demand and need for housing. And we've brought that over to Ireland, working with the local authorities to really use that now as the evidence basis for the housing need and demand. And that tells us things about that population, that it's not all 3-bed semis that we need more apartments, more 1-beds, etc. But look, in terms of the big numbers, 10,000 social homes on average over the 10 years, 4,000 affordable purchase, and 2,000 of those will be the first home shared equity scheme on the market. Now, just to say in terms of affordable purchase, that's one of the places that was really impacted, obviously, by the downturn. 2011, I was in the department there, and the circular went out to local authorities that stood down all affordable purchase at that time. So it's taken us this long, it's 10 years, and now we're relaunching that, we have the legislation, etc. So a major, it shows you the impact, you know, of the downturn and the crisis. 2,000 cost rental homes, this would be something that's very close to my heart, working with NESC, the housing agency and others, and Vienna, Barcelona, Sweden, all of those countries came to Ireland and told us about this other form of rental that they have. It's a different type of rental model. As Marion said, it's not the only type of rental model, but it's an extra part of the solution that builds this overall better functioning overall housing system. And it really, you know, when you think about people moving out of home, maybe moving to a new city to work, it gives all of those people a different option that at times they don't have in our cities. And then 17,000 additional private homes for sale or rent. I mean, see, as Marion said, that's a huge part. It's around 50-50. I would see it up to 300,000, and you can see that down there underneath how it's broken down. So you've got 90,000, 36,000, 18,000 that will have some form of state support, and then around 156,000 that will be from the private sector. So a national team effort is required, but I mean, say, as I said, from being around the place during that period, I would have a real sense of optimism across all of those stakeholders. And it's a pretty unique place where we sit in the department, because we obviously are very linked to the other government departments, so we'd see that. We would talk to industry a lot, so we would see that, various stakeholder groups. So we do get a sense across the entire system that there's a, you know, cautious optimism, I would call it, as we emerge from COVID. So just in terms of those numbers, and I think it's important to say the 33,000 number is an average, so you can see there the trajectory. And look, there's a lot of realism built into this. So I mean, say there's nobody in the department or across the system wanted to put in targets that are unachievable. They're stretch achievable targets. Nobody thought we'd hit the sort of numbers that we hit last year. I think it's a real sign again of the Irish resilience. You know, it was nearly around 21,000. The average to Q3 of this year is even better than last year. So again, that has rebounded massively despite COVID restrictions, etc. And you can see there the breakdown. So we say for 2022, which is going to be the first year of the plan, 9,000 social homes, so a big challenge there to deliver those. But again, I think the system is up for it, and local authorities will be really important in that, ably helped by the housing agency. 4,100 affordable and cost rental homes, and we've introduced new schemes. We're working with the Land Development Agency, approved housing bodies, local authorities massively to deliver on that. And again, huge, the amount of goodwill and positivity in the system. So we went from having no cost rental scheme in the country, within 12 months, cost rental scheme delivered, and people actually living in those homes. So I think that's, you know, that's a sign of what we can do when we all work together. And then obviously, look, a major piece there for the private home builders. And again, I would talk to the home builders and get a sense from them. And I think that, you know, obviously they need to staff up and do other things. But I think that that's really the space that their heads are in now is, you know, twofold. One is obviously from their own commercial activity, but secondly, I would also see a major kind of piece for the Irish cause in terms of trying to deliver on this housing crisis. Everybody is kind of bought into that. So you'll see based on this, it's around 2024 that we'd meet the 33,000 for the first time, and then there's a bit of oversupply built in to work over the overall 33,000 average. So look, it's not going to be easy to do that. But I've, in some of the other slides, I'm going to show you how I think, based on where we were, where we are, how that's achievable. So look, in terms of the building blocks for this, the minister's actually in place a year. And he did that purposefully. Rather than have a plan the minute that he came in, we actually did a lot of work over the year in getting ready for the plan. And then the plan came out after that year. So in terms of, we'd say, you know, and just looking back since 2013, when some of us were there, this is my third strategy now. So at the time of the social housing strategy, the country was building around 4,500 homes altogether. That was in 2013. So I'm going to say house building had just stopped. So that's a sign of where we come from. And you see now that, you know, 22,000 is realistic. And in terms of rebuilding Ireland, the overall target there was around 25,000 homes per annum. And again, we were coming very close to that, and we would have reached that, I think, only for COVID, which came in the latter years of that plan. So look, I mean, say in terms of can the Irish housing system deliver 33,000 new homes in a year? Absolutely. There is no doubt about that. It's going to take a lot of work across the system, but it absolutely can be done. The other thing that has changed and had to change was that a huge amount of the component parts of the Irish housing system, how we did housing, how we deliver housing, all of that had to change. Our own department had to change. We have an affordable housing division now that we didn't have. But again, looking out through my vantage point, the financing has completely changed, and we have PLCs now delivering housing, you know, as well as the traditional home builder sector. The construction sector itself and how it does its business, a huge amount of change in that, and a lot of modernisation, and still I would say a journey to go on that, but a huge amount of work. Local authorities, there was a time back in 2013 when, you know, housing was, I suppose, we were dealing with unfinished estates, things like that, so it has completely changed, and now we're back to affordable housing, etc. Huge amount of capacity building again with the local authorities. The same with approved housing bodies, and you know the delivery across those sectors. Local authorities and approved housing bodies, back in 2013, the social housing delivery was almost non-existent, and now it's back to, I think it was 6,000 we did in 2019, which was the last full year of operation. So, you know, completely turning a huge ship around. The housing agency itself radically changed. The amount of new staff, it's hard to recognise everybody in there now, Bob, but a huge amount done. Same with the Housing Finance Agency. We have a new housing delivery coordination office that's in another agency. We have the Local Government Management Agency, and again, all driving housing delivery. So that, you know, that takes time to do, and we did it as we were delivering on those other plans. So I would see it that, I would say 2013, it was a very stark place that we all saw. We've had 2 housing strategies between now and Housing for All that have really helped to rebuild the Irish housing resi sector. And now I think it's realistic based on that to say we can go for the 33,000 average and beyond that, Marion, if that's what's required. And look, as I said, it's really, when I look at it, there's no component part more important than another. All of those component parts are absolutely critical. And Ireland is different to other places. Even though we can compare, we're a smaller community, you know, in a way kind of everybody knows everybody. So those connections are tight in Ireland across, we'd say, you know, what I would see as the housing system in Dublin and our other cities. So I think there's a huge buy-in to really go for it. So as I said, I'd be very optimistic of reaching those numbers. And then just a quick one here in terms of what we've been doing since last year. The money was absolutely critical. I've been in rooms with lots of delivery partners over lots of years. They have to have certainty over multi-annual funding to be able to do the levels of investment and build our own programs. And local authorities, the Land Development Agency, which would be a new player in that space, and approved housing bodies, you know, absolutely, I think that's really important. The National Development Plan review happened in parallel to Housing for All. So again, that opportunity was taken, that the money was put in place before the plan. I think that's really important. The Minister mentioned that. We have a new Affordable Housing Act for the first time, a standalone housing act that's just affordable housing. That covers cost rental, local authority affordable purchase, the shared equity scheme on the market, and the new Part 5 that will bring affordable housing back under the Part 5 arrangements. You know, the 10% for social housing now will be increased to 20%, and that'll kick in the middle stages of the plan. The Land Development Agency Act was absolutely critical, and look, I think they're going to be vitally important. They changed the way, again, they're in addition to the housing system, a modernisation, I would see it, of how Ireland does housing and how we amass land and use that critical resource. So again, Bob and ourselves working very closely with John Coleman and the guys in the Land Development Agency. That act was a major piece. It was really important for their operation that was gotten over the line, and a complicated piece of legislation. The first ever cost rental units I mentioned, you know, when I talk to people about cost rental, until you have cost rental units, there's a little bit of disbelief that Ireland is ever going to do cost rental. So it was very important to get it. It's complicated. It's a different way of doing housing. Now that we have it, I would see huge momentum building behind that. The investment, we mentioned Irish Water, which is part of our own, in our own department, but across the system, all of those stakeholders that also, contribute to housing, we'll be working very closely with all of those across government to make sure that it's, it's not just housing estates that we build, and we know that, it's communities, and that whole part of it, I think, is absolutely critical. So a lot of work done in that space. And again, we're at this since 2013, so those relationships and things have been building towards housing for all. The Lisbon Declaration I mentioned again, that has been really well received. And look, the NGOs are great partners to talk to. Bob worked in that sector himself. It's a challenging place to work. They're people that are absolutely on the front line. And if you want to get a good critique of your plans, etc., they're the right people to talk about. They've really roundly welcomed this and said you have to, as I said, Ireland has to go for it. And then the whole of government piece, look, I'll talk to you about the mechanics of that, but it was mentioned at one of the first conferences I went to years back, one of the speakers mentioned that in their dealings, this was someone from the private sector, they had dealings with 12 different arms of the state in terms of what they did, whether it was cross policy, delivery, etc. And look, in fairness, I would accept that. That's what it is like. It's different when you're part of it. You don't maybe notice that as much. But in terms of Housing for All, there's been a real emphasis on that whole of government approach, just to make sure that, any sort of silos, etc., are broken down and everybody is working towards the same goals. So just to maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think it's important for people, as I said, mightn't have the same vantage point as myself. The Cabinet Committee on Housing is chaired by the Taoiseach, and all the key ministers sit on that. So that's the ultimate place where the governance of Housing for All takes place. All of these issues are discussed and dealt with. You've got your Minister for Finance, Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Minister for Education, Health, etc. All of those key ministers on that Cabinet Committee, all with the lens looking at housing and chaired by the Taoiseach. Underneath that, you have the Housing for All Secretary-General's groups. So that's all the heads of all the various government departments. And there's 4 subgroups to that: investment, industry, capability, public service delivery. Now, one of the interesting things is that there would be a slight change, is that it's not a Housing Secretary-General that chairs all of those groups. So we'd say, for instance, it's the Secretary-General from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform that chairs the Public Service Delivery Group. And again, that gives it a slightly different lens, a different focus, brings different things to the table, and really builds this overall whole of government approach. In terms of groups that I'd work with myself, all the key stakeholders, the key delivery partners across social housing, affordable housing and homelessness are brought together. I think the Minister mentioned that. So for instance, on the affordable group, and look, just to say, the work that's been done on affordable couldn't be done without the Housing Agency. The Housing Agency was one of the key places, because the country stopped doing a lot of this stuff for a long time. The Housing Agency was one of the last places that was a real repository of corporate memory on a lot of the different elements of it, so we're absolutely critical. So the Housing Agency, the Department, Land Development Agency, approved housing bodies, local authorities, we all sit on the Affordable Housing Working Group together at CEO level of all those various bodies. And we strategize together, we're overseeing the implementation and delivery. So I think, look, and the same happens on social and homelessness. So there's a really well coordinated and a huge drive for delivery. It's going to be very well, and look, this is something that we've done well, I think, throughout all the strategies, but again, the reporting and the monitoring will be very strong. Extra emphasis this time around on communications and stakeholder engagement. So look, that's going to be a cornerstone of the plan, because at times, again, we can get into it and start delivering, etc., but it's very important that we continue to bring everybody with us. And then in a previous incarnation and throughout my career, I would have worked very closely with local authorities. Local authorities are obviously very different to other delivery partners. They are local government. They are the democratic representation at the local level, housing authorities, planning authorities. So in a way, I suppose the central coordination and policy happens at central government and through those structures. That happens then in turn at local level in each of the key local authorities. we have a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So look, that's all I have to say. As I said, I've been around a while, and launched a few of the various plans, but I would be very optimistic about this one. Thanks.
Thank you, Barry. And only a few grey hairs, despite this being your third plan. I was just thinking when I was listening to Barry, he was talking about how tight-knit the Irish public is. My father was a county councillor for nearly 50 years. My brother's an auctioneer and was president of the IAVI. And I have two sisters. One works in Focus and the other is a housing officer for a local authority. So it's amazing how people can really coalesce and be involved in so many different parts of the housing sector. So look, we have time now for some questions. Does anybody here in the room want to ask something, or will I hijack it and ask some of my own before I get to those online? In here? No, okay. So actually, Barry, I want to put the first one to you maybe that I had. You were talking there about stakeholder engagement and all these different sectors, and it seems to me that one of the most important sectors is actually the general public. And getting them behind a realisation that we need to build all this housing. We know the problems with objections and how the planning, so all these plans could come to a halt if we don't get the public believing in housing. Is there anything you want to say to the wider audience about housing and how we get this moving?
Yeah, thanks. Is this on here? Yeah. So look, I suppose just two things about that. And as I say, I would have worked a long time with local authorities, and for me, they're really embedded in our communities, and that community piece is the key piece around new housing. And new housing can be a challenge for people that live in existing communities. But for me, it's that engagement at local level is absolutely critical. And I think local authorities are really well placed as part of their work, so they do a lot of that. Sarah. And then I think, look, as much as possible, there's a major communications piece around this. So some of it is joining the dots. Everybody accepts that eradication of homelessness is a national objective. Everybody accepts that we need to build more houses. The problems come with where should they be, what should they look like, what height should they be. And I think all of those issues for me, some of it is best done centrally. And I think that's important, and in terms of guidelines and international best practice, I think we have that. A lot of it for me is done best locally and through the councils working off those frameworks that we have to agree nationally. And I think while there are times that maybe it doesn't work or it's too slow, there's a lot of times when it works really well. And you build this whole parts. If you look at the CSO and the census, there's whole towns that have been and new towns that have been built and reinvigorated parts of the country that maybe had been moving in the other direction.
Yeah, I know the small town that I work in, the boom did it the world of good because we had more people. We got great services. We got a better train service, more takeouts, bus service, everything. People bring, more services with them. But Bob, on that point of local government, Dermot Lacey, whom we all know, he was concerned that there were no councillors on the panels of the session this week. What role do you see for councillors in all of this?
Obviously, yeah. I think councillors play, I suppose this week is about, practitioners and the policy makers and the people that are delivering housing in the sector, but obviously local government is a hugely important partner in this. I think in relation to your previous question, I suppose there is an issue in relation to, objections. And I suppose what's really important for councillors is to, I think, tell people who the beneficiaries of this housing is going to be going forward. I think the public discourse does need to catch up a little bit as well. I think people think we need more 3-bedroom semi-detached housing when actually we need a lot more smaller housing, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, because our demographics are changing and because we have needs around, single adults who are homeless, people on local authority waiting lists and so on. So I think people need to understand the benefits to their own community. But I do think actually the public discourse may have changed a little bit during COVID. As I mentioned during my speech, when people have been confined, I suppose, to the 5-kilometre perimeter, 2-kilometre perimeter, they've also seen a lot of vacancy in their community and so on. And young people in particular, that I've been talking to, the people I've been talking to, I think, realise that that's a missed opportunity for them. So hopefully that will change the whole issue, I suppose, around planning objections maybe going forward.
Marion, that brings me on to rental. You know, it's funny, and because I'm in the media, I am aware that there's often this large gap between what's being talked about publicly and what's happening on the ground. So when it comes to rental, there's this idea you have all these evil landlords, you know, exploiting tenants. We see tenants themselves now being referred to as transients, the kind of people that you don't want in your neighbourhood. And that extraordinary statistic you had about private landlords just leaving the market in droves. Can you talk to us a little bit more about why those landlords are leaving and the attitude we have towards renters?
Yeah, just on as you started there, Sarah, the comments you made about the evil landlord and the transients, etc. I mean, I think the property sector is awash with that, whether it's vultures or transients, whatever else. And I think we do need, it is, there's nothing like housing to invigorate a conversation. So I think we just need to be very careful that we step back and look at the real picture. So for the rental sector, there is a huge, I mean, I think it's probably one of the most pressing issues. If you look back to just before the global financial crisis, at any one time, if you logged on to DAFT, there were about 20,000 tenancies available to you, houses available for you to rent in the entire country. Just before COVID hit, there was about 3,000. Now, it improved a little bit during COVID in that we saw some of the short-term lets, as in holiday home lets, going into the long-term rental market. That isn't a long-term solution. So once the market reopens, we're going to have an increasing problem with the lack of availability of rental accommodation. So what happens when an employer says, okay, I can now have 75% of my staff back, and the person who's living down the country says, well, I can't get accommodation. How do we deal with that? So we need to get ahead of it. And the private landlord is an essential part of that solution. And just labelling them as greedy landlords, anyone who's in this sector will tell you it's not about being a greedy landlord.
So why are they leaving the sector?
It's just not a viable one to be in. So if you're paying 52% tax, and you have huge level of regulation, which is right to have right regulation, and you have your tenants ringing you, and there are, for as many cranky landlords, there's bad tenants. There's both sides of the equation. People are speaking with their feet. So if 30% of our vendors every year, which is thousands of people, are selling out of this market every year, then we need to do something to address it.
Yeah, and funny, I was always struck as well, people were always complaining we had too many private landlords, unprofessional landlords in the market, and we needed the pension funds coming in. But then when they're coming in, we don't seem to like those either.
You don't need to swing so far, just a movement in the right
Rosalind,
direction.
have we some questions coming in online? Yeah?
We do, Sarah. Yep. So there's a few questions that have come in online. So this is one. How in practice will the department work with local authorities to facilitate increased output of social and affordable housing in partnership with developers?
And will we put that maybe to Barry?
So look, in terms of social housing now, from where it started, we say back in 2013 when it had really fallen off a cliff, it's a well-oiled machine. So I'm going to say we got up to 6,000 homes delivered, multi-channel, multifaceted there. That's build, acquisition and lease. So that's not even the rental homes that the state would support, which really would have added to that. I think we would have been around 24,000 overall. So, the schemes, etc., are in place for that. We now have an Affordable Housing Act, and it recognises and it empowers local authorities to deliver affordable housing through multi-channels. And I suppose the difference between the affordable and the social housing is the social housing, the state kind of picks up the full tab. The social housing will generally be a state investment of 20-30% to help people to buy homes, or in the case of cost rental, to support approved housing bodies to supply homes to people at rents that are 25% plus below market rent. So the social housing, would be very confident that, as I said, it's really just an increase in output across those various schemes, and we're building capacity in local authorities and looking at staffing, etc. The Housing Delivery Coordination Office is really important, and centres of excellence like the Housing Agency. And on the affordable side, we're building that. The affordable will be in a different place to the social, and that's really rebuilding a sector. But important to build, first of all, to deliver across the various schemes, which are all in place now, and the legislation will be followed up, the primary legislation with the regulations. We're doing a huge amount of workshops now with local authorities. And look, just to say, I think there's massive interest in the affordable side, because again, it's more part of these mixed tenure communities that local authorities want to build and support in their own areas. So look, I'd be very confident that it's particularly the social, as I said, it's about increasing output, and the affordable, there's a huge momentum building behind that, and again it's about getting units delivered in all of the key areas of the country and building on that.
Thanks, Barry. I have a question that came in advance from Ed Martin. He's a property consultant, and I'll put this to you, Bob. He says, I concentrate on providing accommodation for single people. At the moment, a number of the pension funds will only purchase our schemes where there is a direct lease with the council, which is frustrating as it is ruling out some great organisations like Peter McVerry. I understand the funds to a certain extent as it's a government-backed security, but it's ruling out some very experienced operators in the space. Are there any plans for the housing authorities to underwrite the third-party leases?
Well, I mean, at the moment there is the payment availability agreements basically with the AHBs to underpin lease agreements. So I suppose the issue there is really about working with the AHBs, such as the Peter McVerry Trust, to bring more properties on board.
So can I just say on
Yeah.
that, look, I think it's very, look, Peter McVerry I would work with on two fronts. One, on they do incredible work on the homelessness front, but also, you know, in that space, in the supply of social housing and moving people out of homelessness. So look, we'd be in contact with Peter McVerry. They're our delivery partners and working with the local authorities. So I'm saying any leads that they have in terms of supply or impediments to supply, those channels are absolutely open, and that's the best way to bring them forward. You know, so, you know, those contacts are there between the department and the housing agency, etc. And look, you know, where there are, that's one of the things that we all have to work on together, because the blockages is not just that it can stop supply, but it can delay supply, and both of those are our enemy now. So there's a real openness to try and deal with some of those, or any of those blockages that are there in the system.
Okay, thank you. Rosalind, do you have another one from our online audience?
Yes, okay, so maybe I'll ask two now. The first one is, how much of an effect did the eviction ban have on the reduction of homelessness in early 2021, and has there been any research commissioned on understanding the mechanisms behind the rapid decrease? And perhaps we'd also ask then, did the Minister consider capping rents outside of the rental pressure zones also, as rents here will increase to unaffordable rates in this region?
Well, why don't we put the eviction one to Bob, and then I don't know if Barry wants to perhaps anticipate that one about the Minister. So eviction levels, or the ban on evictions during COVID, what effect did that have?
Well, there's no doubt it had a positive effect in terms of, you know, stopping the flow of people into homelessness. I think the other thing that also happened though as well is there was close cooperation between local authorities and the HSE in terms of moving people from the streets into safe one-bedroom accommodation as well. So there was, and obviously we hope that that will continue. So the issue has been the private rented sector. The issue is the lack of affordable supply, eviction bans, rent freezes and so on can only go so far, but ultimately we need more properties on the market. And we do need both the mom and pop landlords as well as the institutional property investors as well. So, like, really the issue going forward is going to be about supply, and as we can see over the last couple of months, unfortunately, homeless numbers have started to go up slightly again, particularly families.
So Barry, the rental cap.
Look, just on the homeless one quickly first, you know, and I have homelessness in the department again, and I would see it kind of three ways. One is around prevention, so there's a huge amount of work done on that and with our partners. The other then is, look, when unfortunately people find themselves at homeless, trying to provide the best form of accommodation within homelessness, but then the exits are absolutely critical. And I think it's important just to recognise, like, the work that goes in to moving people out of homelessness across local authorities, the NGOs that were mentioned, was incredible. So I'm going to say that 10,000 down to less than 8,000 was hard yards by all of those bodies working together. And I think, look, we're facing a little bit of a challenge at the moment, but there's a real sense now to try and get, and how do you get down, I think you mentioned this about the eradication, Sarah, how do you get down to the numbers that we want to see, you know, in terms of what that looks like? You get from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5, so that's what we're working toward. On the rental piece, look, I have a lot of responsibilities in the department. The rental sector policy is not one of them. So look, in terms of the formation of that policy, I wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have that firsthand. But look, I think what has come out, there's been a huge amount of work has gone into that. I think the Minister has done a huge amount in the rental sector since he came into the department. So there's been a major focus on that, and it's always a balance, because you're trying to balance for people that are facing really high rents today and are maybe worried about that tomorrow, but then also trying to build a sustainable rental sector where people can invest, And again, traditionally in Ireland, there's relationships between all of those people. So people want to supply a good product, they want to make a kind of fair amount of money out of it and for it to be reasonable, and then people want to be able to rent and have security on that. So that's always the policy intent.
And there's a question I think that would be best directed to Marion that came in advance as well. It's from Joseph Kilroy, who's the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Building. So talking about the target of 30,000 houses a year, he says the underlying principle seems to be that this amount will make housing more affordable. However, it is never explicitly stated what the impact on prices housing targets will have. So would you like to stick your neck out and guess what the impact on the purchase price or rent of houses will be if 30,000 houses are delivered per year?
I think it's a very straightforward question. I mean, I think there is obviously a relationship between the quantity of property delivered and the price that will be achieved. Where we are now, if you think about it, is that we haven't delivered enough houses since before the global financial crisis, so there is a massive backlog. What's driving prices at the moment is really the very, very low levels of stock in rural Ireland. That's the key driver of prices. And where we have delivered accommodation, albeit not enough, not nearly enough, we're seeing much greater stability, supported by the legislation for the macroprudential policy rules. So I would see that what the increase in stock will do is allow a more normalised price performance. So price inflation of less than 3% is ideal. Everyone thinks estate agents want prices to rise. We don't. It's not good for society. It's not good for the business that we do. For everybody, we need stability of prices. Low price inflation is the solution. And I think getting the right mix of accommodation coming through will achieve that. On the rental side, we have a bit to go there. So I think capping the rents, I don't agree with that policy. But I think the solution is about bringing a lot more rental accommodation and looking at what Ireland is. We're not London, we're not the UK, so PRS won't solve our rental crisis. Cost rental will go a long way to helping the problem, but for the private rental sector, we do need that dispersal of private investors, and only then will we really see stability in the rental sector. And if you compare what prices have done in the last few years, prices are typically still over 20% below their peak. No one wants to go back to the peak, but rents are at least 20% ahead of their previous peak. So that's where the big issue is. And
I was really glad to see you make that point about the macroprudential rules, that they're doing their job, because I see sometimes that thing bubbling up, oh, these rules are strangling us and, we can't afford a new house. And of course, that's what did it for us the last time. So that support for those rules is great. Rosalind, anything else from online? Yeah.
Okay. This one from Marion. What policy changes would it take to allow sales of properties with tenants in situ without significantly impacting on the price received by the vendor? This happens in the commercial sector, but it's rare in private rental.
I think that's a very tricky one, selling accommodation with tenants in situ. I can see the logic of why people would want to do that, but this is an open marketplace and the purchaser has to be free to choose their own tenant. It's slightly different in the commercial world because that creates the covenant of tenancy. So I think it isn't, I don't think that's as simple a solution as it's laid out to be. I think really the solution here is about making the landscape such that we have enough interested parties that are already there. Let's be honest, we did see a huge level of investment in the rental sector during the Celtic Tiger. We just need to retain those landlords in place and encourage more to come back in. And I think tweaking things like keeping tenants in place isn't going to be the long-term solution here. And I think it's questionable that we could even do it.
Any more? Is that it? Well, if you can. I have one more question myself I want to put to the panel. Okay, well, Niamh Kelly from One Family. Now, she had sent this in to ask the Minister, but maybe Bob could actually take it up. Given the overrepresentation of one-parent families in homelessness, what specific measures will be taken under Housing for All to target these families? And will he consider developing a family homelessness strategy? So I guess the one-parent part.
Yeah, the one-parent part,
Yes,
the family
yeah.
homelessness strategies
Yeah.
to the Minister.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a need for more one-bedroom properties or smaller bedroom properties in order to support one-parent families. I think there may be particular issues in terms of poverty as well and supports. And I think that while there aren't specific measures under Housing for All, clearly it is focusing in on that particular, group of family homeless people.
And then maybe a big one as we start to finish up, and I think maybe Barry and Marion might like to address this. Again, in the public discourse, there's a sense, a perception, and you might be able to correct it, that the government is overly interested in private financing and doesn't have its shoulder to the wheel in terms of public spending on social housing. So people have this nostalgic sense of all the public housing that was built in, the 30s, 40s and 50s. Is that what's happening? Are we relying too much on private financing, or is this really about a public spending effort in social housing?
Well, I mean, you say that the 20 billion is there, it's set out. It's not just Exchequer funding, the Housing Finance Agency, its capacity to lend has been increased. The Land Development Agency has access to 1.25 billion. These are all, elements of state investment. And as I said, the social housing, the model is tried and tested. The state picks up the tab. And in terms of the affordable housing, the state is going to be investing 20 to 30% across the housing system, and we have those other elements. So while the changes that came to the housing system and the things that would drive a kind of a cap on house prices and affordability, even though prices can be unaffordable to a lot of people in particular parts of the country, there are a lot of those elements. We're trying to work with all of those elements to make sure that where the state is making a huge investment, but really the focus is always on the end user. Can the person access a house when they want to buy it at a price that's affordable to them? So there's going to be a hell of a lot more people who'll be able to do that based on the plan, particularly around the affordable housing. And then on the social housing, can you get access, if you're on the social housing list, to a home quicker? Absolutely. There's going to be 10,000 of them delivered on an annual basis. So to be honest with you, the biggest challenge really is just in terms of the various steps that we've taken, is trying to do all this quickly. Because the system can absolutely do it, but we need to do it as quickly as possible.
Well, Bob, will I give you the final word then? It's 20 past, so we're a little bit over our time. What do you want people watching today to take home with them?
I think what we want to take home is, first of all, that the funding framework is there under Housing for All, and it's guaranteed over a long period of time so people can make long-term plans. There is the affordable segment, that middle segment of the market between social and private, is being really worked on in a big way at the moment. And there's a new tenure there called cost rental. And I think there's also a real focus in Housing for All on the people, to some extent, that have been left behind over time. People with disabilities, people who are homeless, even kind of integrating older people into mainstream communities. So I think the most important thing here is that we have a plan. There's something in that plan that kind of tackles all the area. The 213 actions are necessary, and that all of us as different agencies, I suppose, are working on different aspects of that in order to deliver on the overall target. But I suppose that for us, it's around improving supply and making sure we have sustainable communities going forward. And those communities are obviously going to be mixed tenure communities. So we need to also focus in on placemaking. It's not enough to have, lots of different types of housing. There needs to be lots of things around that in terms of shops and services, play spaces and so on, and we're working on that we'll be working on that over the next 5 years.
Great, well thank you, and thanks to Barry Quinlan, Marion Finnegan and you, Bob, and thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to tune in again tomorrow at 11:30 for the next session. Thank you.